and she asked me if I would speak to her group in her living room. I said, sure, why not? So I gave my first lecture, Flying Saucers Are Real, in her living room. Did that same radio program a number of times, did a lot more lectures, the chicken and peas circuit, as I used to call it. Everybody wants free programs, you know. They're not free anymore for anybody listening.
Right.
And I lucked out in another regard. One of two times when I drove to work, I live in downtown Pittsburgh, the astronuclear lab of Westinghouse was out of town, and I was riding in with Joanne to work because my car was in the garage, and we're talking, and she was a supervisor at Westinghouse, incidentally, one of the few women with PhDs in the hard science who had his high-level job then, and I said, gee, I'd love to speak at Carnegie Mellon University. She says, well, why don't you talk to the dean? I said, well, I talked to Dr. So-and-so, and he wasn't interested. She said, Stan, the dean's my husband. He's heard you on the radio. Give him a call.
Wow.
So, okay, I gave him a call. Sure, he'd love to have me speak. They had a regular series of programs, and we set up a date, but it was during the day, which meant I'd have to take some time off work because I'd have to come back into town and so forth. And his final question then was, how much do you want? Oh, boy. Okay, I said $100, figuring he'd knock me down to $50, but that's better than nothing. Sold, but then because I knew his wife, he told me what he was paying the other people in the series, $1,500, $1,700,
wow,
$1,600. The lecture went extremely well, big crowd, and he wrote a nice letter to the agent through whom he had booked the other programs, and they booked me at the Engineering Society of Detroit, and they were sold out. I got $300 for that plus expenses. Wow, I was in the big time.
Yeah.
And they were sold out 3 weeks in advance for 1,008 people for dinner and a talk, and there were no negative questions.
Wow.
That made a big impression on me, because these weren't a bunch of little old ladies in tennis shoes. These were hard-nosed engineers. You know, they worked for GM and Chrysler and so forth, Ford. And I gave a whole bunch of talks to technical groups, several sections of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, largest group of space scientists in the world, the American Nuclear Society. I had a strange experience. I asked my boss at Westinghouse, I said, look, I need some guidance here. I want to do more speaking, but I got a wife, I got a kid, I got a mortgage, I got a good job, I have a security clearance. I don't want to lose any of these things, so I need some guidance. And if they had told me, we don't want you to say anything, I probably wouldn't have, because I value my job, etc.
Right.
But the management came back to me. They gave me 3 rules. One, you can say whatever you please on your time. 2, you can identify yourself as a Westinghouse nuclear physicist. 3, we'd like you to start with a disclaimer that says the views you're about to hear are mine and mine alone and not those of my employer. And who could be more reasonable than that?
Right.
Well, one step farther. I get a call from a colleague at Los Alamos. We were both working on radiation shielding for nuclear rocket engines. And Glenn says, hey, Stan, I hear you're giving a lot of talks to groups about flying saucers. How about speaking to our local section of the American Nuclear Society? And I was a member of the American Nuclear Society. I said, sure, I'd love to. No, I mean on an expense account, Stan. I'm in Pittsburgh. He's in New Mexico. I said, well, I don't make those decisions. Let me talk to management. And they said, yes. So I went to Los Alamos in New Mexico, clearly for the purpose of giving a lecture, Flying Saucers Are Real, illustrated lecture, to the Los Alamos section of the American Nuclear Society. We had 500 people there, great crowd, very positive response. What I'm leading up to is that the transition to full-time ufologist, if you will, came for 2 reasons. One, the bottom was falling out of the advanced nuclear and space systems business. A lot of less money being spent. And it's not the kind of job you go down the street to find another company doing the same thing, rather esoteric sort of stuff. And 2, I enjoyed speaking and found out I was being very well responded to by people I had to respect. One that talk in Pittsburgh, my boss's boss's boss, 3 levels up, attended the lecture, sponsored by a joint group from the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics and the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers. So it wasn't kook groups that I was speaking to, whose opinion I probably wouldn't care much for. And so 1970s, 71, I went full-time. I've done some consulting work since. I've done some studies for the Canadian Electrical Association around Pittsburgh. I worked on the Point Lepreau plant. Aren't too many freelance nuclear physicists around.
Yeah.
You know, for short-term jobs. That was 6 months, but good money, and I enjoyed it. So it's never been from a religious viewpoint. It's always been from a scientific viewpoint. I've spoken at some lectures at some places like University of Saskatchewan 4 times, I think, in Saskatoon. They love me in Saskatoon. And what I found is that there is enormous public interest. There is a lot of ignorance, and people are aware of that. I check all my audiences. I talk about 5 large-scale scientific studies, first one being Blue Book Special Report 14 that I mentioned before. And I'm bold enough to not only tell them what's in it, show them a slide and so forth, but ask when I finish each item, how many have read this report? So I know it's fewer than 2%.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm ready to take on anybody who, well, I'll give you a specific example. Gulf Research Labs in Pittsburgh. Guy interrupts me 3 times. It was at a dinner talk. The boss says, hey, let him finish. He finally did. First guy in the question and answer period. Well, I'm sure one could come to other conclusions than you have. And I held my temper, said, well, as I recall, you hadn't read any of those 5 large-scale scientific studies, right? Yes, that's right. Well, I said, well, what's the difference between us? I gave you my conclusions. I gave you the sources of data that led me to those conclusions. You haven't read any of them. Whose opinion is worth more? Long silence. Somebody else asked a question. So, yeah, it wasn't nasty. But I don't see why I should give a public platform to somebody who doesn't know anything about the subject.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the real problems with the press coverage of this subject is they think everybody's opinion is equally valuable. I don't know how many people caught the Larry King show a week ago last night with a bit of Stephen Hawking and Dan Aykroyd, the only sensible one on the program.
Yeah, that's right.
Michio Kaku, who wasn't too bad, and then Dr. Seth Shostak and Dr. Bree, astronomer. And I've been on Larry a total now of 4 times. They always have a noisy negativist who doesn't know anything about the subject.
Yeah.
Bill Nye, the science guy whose purpose is to deny.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I happen to believe that if you're going to express a supposedly scientific opinion about something, you should study the evidence first. Otherwise, say, I don't know anything about this subject. And these guys believe they don't need to know anything. I mean, can you imagine? Here we have guys who haven't looked at any of the UFO data, and I've debated Seth Shostak. We were on a couple of Larry King programs when I debated him on Coast to Coast radio. 3 hours, 3 to 6 in the morning, our time.
Unbelievable.
And I got 57% of the vote. He got 33 and 10%. So I don't know who won. Seth had heard me speak on the Queen Elizabeth II. We each gave 3 lectures. And he hadn't raised his hand for any of those 5 studies. And he did say once on Coast to Coast that my book was on his nightstand. He didn't say he'd read it, you understand.
Exactly, yeah.
And so I get so sick and tired of these guys. Do you realize, now some people get mad at me for saying SETI stands for Sleep Effort to Investigate, but if you look at the basic assumptions, there's not many civilizations out there. Frank Drake says 10,000 in the galaxy. That means 1 in 10 million stars has a planet capable of sending radio messages, which I think is many, 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 many too few. That means that within 1,000 light years of here, there would be 2, of which we would be 1.
Right.
Secondly, they don't give any reason at all. Why would anybody try to send us messages using technology appropriate to our situation? We've known about radio a little over 100 years. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. There are stars less than 40 light years away that are 1 billion years older than the sun. And nobody got started before we did and developed new technology?
Exactly.
I don't use the slide rule anymore in my calculations. I was doing that 50 years ago, but what I'm saying is I can't imagine why any civilization would sort of pick us out of the blue, literally, and send us messages. Hi there, what can we do for you?
So what is your opinion on this, Stan? Do you think we should nix this whole program altogether, or should we take a totally different approach? Like, how should we tackle this
Well,
situation?
the question is, what are you trying to determine? They
Right.
call themselves searching for extraterrestrial intelligence. They're not. They're searching for radio signals.
Exactly.
They could have been sent by a device set up 1,000 years ago by a civilization that is no longer around.
That's right.
I can't imagine why anybody would do that, especially, and here's the kicker. If you're going to ask me, what should we do about extraterrestrial intelligence, my first question would be, okay, do we have any information about extraterrestrial intelligence? Not theoretical claptrap, but data. Oh, we got this whole body of information. We've got loads of abduction cases. We have more than 3,000 physical trace cases where people see saucers on or near the ground. 1/6 of the cases involving beings associated with the saucers. We've got all kinds of multiple witness radar visual cases. Oh, so we do have evidence. I mean, if you're dealing with a manufactured object behaving, and this is for more than 50 years now, behaving in ways that the systems we build can't duplicate, because if we could duplicate them, they would have been used in all the wars we have. That's where the money comes from, to develop advanced technology. A good example would be the stealth fighter. $10 billion and done in secret, and we used it. So if they weren't built here, they were built someplace else. That means that by definition they're extraterrestrial. Doesn't say where they came from, how they operate, what they want. Now this question of what they want, I heard more silliness in this discussion. I mean, I'll admit that radio astronomers aren't known for dealing with the real world of people and motivation of earthlings, no less aliens. But I can't imagine why they would come here now. Why now, says Dr. Shostak.
Right.
Well, let me point out something. There have been some changes here on planet Earth that are guaranteed to be of interest to anybody else in the neighborhood.
Absolutely.
I make one assumption about every advanced civilization. It's concerned about its own survival and security. Everybody we know. If they weren't, they wouldn't last very long, would they?
That's right.
Okay. That being the case, at the end of World War II, there were 3 good reasons for saying that soon these primitive earthlings, primitive society's major activity is obviously tribal warfare. We only killed 50 million of our own kind during the war, destroyed 1,700 cities, not very nice guys. There were 3 signs that soon we'd be able to move out to bother somebody else. Nuclear weapons, a heck of a lot more energy per pound than burning hydrogen and oxygen. V-2 rockets, which were used for military purposes, not to deliver the mail between Germany and England. And third, radar, which didn't exist before the war, but which is the first step up the electronic ladder of development. And we've come a long way, baby, on those. Now, isn't it interesting that the only place in the world in July 1947 where you could study all 3 of these technologies was southeastern New Mexico?
Mm-hmm.
First nuclear bomb was exploded on Trinity site. I've been there. It's only open 2 days a year, incidentally, on the White Sands Missile Range. That's where they also were testing then the German V-2 rockets that we captured. We were supposed to share them with England, but we didn't. We grabbed a whole boatload, brought them over, and we're firing them down there. And that's where we had our best radar to track the rockets, which, as it happened, sometimes went the wrong way. Went south instead of north. Mexico was not happy about that. Now, admittedly, I was on a program in England where an English astronomer, a very haughty English astronomer, and boy, can they get haughty. Well, they could have gone to the Soviet Union. Sorry, they didn't test their first A-bomb until August 1949.